October 31st, 1948. The Lenox Lounge on 125th Street and Malcolm X Boulevard. Bumpy Johnson sat alone at table 7, counting cash that would take most Harlem families a lifetime to see. 20 years earlier, on this exact night, his mother begged neighbors for bread scraps. Now, the Italian mob bosses waited in the back room to negotiate with him. That's exactly why every street soldier in New York wanted to know his secret. What happened between that hungry 10-year-old boy and this moment became the blueprint for black power in organized crime. The 5 families didn't just tolerate Bumpy Johnson. They needed him. By 1948, he controlled the entire Harlem numbers racket, worth $50 million annually in today's money. Police captains called before raiding his operations. Dutch Schultz tried to muscle him out and paid with his life. Lucky Luciano himself sent word from exile in Italy asking for Bumpy's cooperation, not demanding it. For 40 years after that Halloween night in 1948, when old-timers talked about real power in Harlem, they always came back to Bumpy Johnson. The man who survived when survival seemed impossible. The starving kid who built an empire the Italian mob had to respect. This is the true story of hunger, ruthlessness, strategy, and the moment that changed the underworld forever. But to understand what happened that night, we need to go back exactly 20 years. October 31st, 1928. The Great Depression hadn't officially started yet, but for black families in Harlem, the economic collapse began years earlier. Bumpy Johnson was 10 years old, living in a railroad apartment on West 139th Street with his mother Margaret and his younger sister Mabel. His father abandoned them 3 years prior. Margaret Johnson worked as a domestic for a white family on the Upper East Side. 6 days a week, she rode the subway downtown to clean houses for $5. By the time she paid rent, bought coal for heat, and covered utilities, she had maybe $2 left for food. For 3 people. For 7 days. That Halloween night in 1928, young Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, the boy who'd later be called Bumpy, watched his mother pour water into a pot to make soup from 1 potato and half an onion. His little sister, Mabel, cried from hunger. Margaret turned her face to the wall so her children wouldn't see her tears. Bumpy walked to the corner store on Lenox Avenue. He stared through the window at the bread, the cheese, the apples stacked in wooden crates. The white store owner, Mr. Goldstein, tapped on the glass and shooed him away like a stray dog. Something broke in that 10-year-old boy that night, or maybe something crystallized. He made a decision that would shape the next 40 years of his life. Nobody would ever make him beg again. Nobody would ever have the power to watch his family starve while they ate. And one day, the people who looked through him like he didn't exist would know his name. Within 6 months, young Bumpy started running numbers for Stephanie St. Clair, the legendary Madam Queen of Policy, who controlled Harlem's gambling operations. He proved himself smart, fearless, and absolutely loyal. Stephanie saw something in this hungry kid, a rage that could be channeled, an intelligence that could be sharpened into a weapon. But the white gangsters downtown saw something different. They saw Harlem's numbers racket generating millions, and they wanted it. By 1935, Dutch Schultz, born Arthur Flegenheimer, decided Harlem belonged to him. The Dutchman was a psychopath even by gangster standards. He once beat a man to death with a tire iron for a perceived insult. Lucky Luciano called him unpredictable and dangerous. Coming from Lucky Luciano, that meant something. Schultz sent his enforcers into Harlem to collect protection fees from the numbers runners. Most paid. The ones who refused ended up in Harlem Hospital or the morgue. Schultz figured the black operators would fold quickly. He figured wrong. Stephanie St. Clair refused to pay a dime. And standing next to her, now 27 years old and already building his reputation, was Bumpy Johnson. "Let them come," Bumpy told Stephanie. "Harlem ain't downtown. Different rules up here." Dutch Schultz sent 15 men to Lenox Avenue on a Tuesday afternoon in June 1935. They walked into the number spot at 133rd Street, expecting to collect $50,000 or burn the place down. What Dutch Schultz didn't realize was that Bumpy Johnson had been preparing for this moment since he was 10 years old, staring through that store window, invisible and powerless. He'd spent 17 years making sure he'd never be powerless again. Bumpy didn't meet violence with violence that day. He met it with strategy. Within 24 hours, every number spot in Harlem shut down completely. Every single one. Schultz's men collected nothing because there was nothing to collect. The entire operation went dark. 40,000 Harlem residents who played the numbers daily had nowhere to place their bets. Now here's where it gets complicated. Dutch Schultz lost more than the protection money. He lost the weekly skim, the percentage points, the entire revenue stream he'd been counting on. But more importantly, he lost face. Every gangster in New York knew the Dutchman got shut out of Harlem by a black crew. In the underworld, reputation is currency. Schultz's currency just crashed. The Dutchman went to the Commission, the ruling body of New York's 5 families established by Lucky Luciano. He demanded they authorize a full-scale war on Harlem's independent operators. He wanted Stephanie St. Clair dead. He wanted Bumpy Johnson dead. He wanted to burn Harlem to the ground if necessary. Lucky Luciano said no. Not because Luciano cared about black gangsters, not because he opposed violence, but because Luciano understood something Dutch Schultz couldn't grasp. Harlem required different management. You couldn't just muscle your way in. The community protected its own. A war in Harlem would mean dead cops, federal attention, and newspapers screaming about mob violence in black neighborhoods. The heat would destroy everyone's business. Work with them, Luciano reportedly told Schultz. Not against them. Dutch Schultz refused. He kept pushing. And on October 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz walked into the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. 2 gunmen walked in behind him. They shot him once in the chest, then calmly walked out. The Dutchman died the next day, still ranting incoherently from his hospital bed. The Commission had made their decision. Dutch Schultz was too unstable, too reckless, and too stupid to see the bigger picture. But here's what nobody knew at the time. Bumpy Johnson had met with Lucky Luciano's representatives 3 days before the hit. According to accounts from former mob associates interviewed decades later, Bumpy didn't threaten. He didn't plead. He presented a business proposal. He explained how Harlem's numbers racket worked, the trust required with the community, the infrastructure already in place. He offered the Italian families a percentage, not control, a percentage, in exchange for Dutch Schultz backing off. When asked what would happen if Schultz didn't back off, Bumpy's response became legend. Then Harlem goes dark permanently and you lose millions, or you remove the problem. 3 days later, Dutch Schultz was dead. For the next 13 years, from 1935 to 1948, Bumpy Johnson built his empire brick by brick. He partnered with Italian mobsters when it served him. He went to prison 3 times for minor charges, using his time inside to build relationships with connected inmates. He studied how the 5 families operated, their structure, their discipline, their long-term thinking. And he never forgot that Halloween night in 1928 when he was invisible, powerless, and hungry. By 1948, Bumpy controlled not just the numbers racket, but also loan sharking operations, after-hours clubs, and protection services for Harlem's legitimate businesses. He employed over 300 people directly. Thousands more depended on his operations for their income. The Italian families took their percentage, but they didn't run Harlem. Bumpy did. Which brings us back to October 31st, 1948. 20 years to the day after that hungry 10-year-old boy made his decision. Bumpy Johnson sits at table 7 in the Lenox Lounge. He's 40 years old now, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit that cost more than his mother's annual salary back in 1928. Diamond cufflinks, gold watch. But his eyes still carry that same hunger from 2 decades ago. Only now it's not hunger for food. It's hunger for respect, for power, for the certainty that nobody will ever make him beg again. 3 Italian mobsters wait in the back room. Representatives from the Genovese family. They've requested this meeting to discuss restructuring the Harlem arrangement. Word on the street is they want to increase their percentage from 20 points to 50. Essentially, they want control. Bumpy's lieutenant, a man named Junie Bayard, sits 2 tables away. His hand rests inside his jacket. 4 more of Bumpy's men are scattered throughout the lounge. The bartender, Reggie, keeps a sawed-off shotgun under the bar. The tension is thick enough to choke on. Bumpy stands, adjusts his cufflinks, walks to the back room alone. The 3 Italians, Vito Genovese's men, all made members of the family, sit at a round table. The leader, a captain named Anthony Little Oggi Pisano, doesn't stand when Bumpy enters. A calculated disrespect. "Sit down, Bumpy," Little Oggi says. Bumpy remains standing. "We got a problem," Little Oggi continues. The family feels that the current arrangement don't reflect the reality of the situation. "We provide protection. We provide connections. We keep the feds off your back. That's worth more than 20%. Bumpy says nothing, just stares. 50-50 split, Little Oggi says, starting next week, non-negotiable. The room goes silent. One of the other mobsters shifts in his seat, even they know this is a test. Push too hard, and Harlem goes dark like it did with Dutch Schultz. But show weakness, and every black operator in America thinks they can dictate terms to the 5 families. Bumpy reaches into his jacket pocket. The 3 mobsters tense. Hands move toward weapons. Bumpy pulls out an envelope, places it on the table, slides it to Little Oggi. "Open it," Bumpy says. His voice is calm, cold. The voice of a man who's seen the worst and survived it. Little Oggi opens the envelope. Inside are photographs. Him with his mistress entering a hotel in Midtown. Him meeting with an FBI agent at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. Him pocketing cash from a Genovese family operation without reporting it to his bosses. Little Oggi's face goes white. "Here's the new arrangement," Bumpy says. 20% stays 20%. You go back to Vito and tell him Harlem respects the partnership. But Harlem ain't a colony. We're partners, not subjects. Bumpy leans forward. His next words become part of underworld folklore. "And you tell Vito that if he ever sends someone to disrespect me again, those photos go to Don Vito himself. Along with a ledger showing exactly how much you've been skimming. Then we'll see what's non-negotiable." Bumpy turns and walks out. The 3 mobsters sit in stunned silence. Within 48 hours, word reached Vito Genovese himself. The Don called a sit-down, not to retaliate against Bumpy, to reprimand Little Oggi for overstepping and creating a potential war over nothing. The 20% arrangement remained unchanged until Bumpy's death in 1968. More importantly, the Halloween meeting of 1948 established a precedent. The Italian mob could partner with black gangsters. They could take a cut, but they couldn't control Harlem. That lesson echoed through the decades that followed. When Frank Lucas built his heroin empire in the 1970s, he studied Bumpy Johnson's playbook. When Nicky Barnes became Mr. Untouchable, He followed Bumpy's strategy of controlling territory while partnering with suppliers, never becoming dependent. Bumpy Johnson died on July 7, 1968, from a heart attack at Wells Restaurant on Lenox Avenue. Hundreds attended his funeral. Gangsters, ministers, shopkeepers, politicians. All of Harlem turned out to pay respect. Because Bumpy understood something that Dutch Schultz never did. Real power isn't just about violence. It's about strategy. It's about knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. It's about building something that lasts beyond yourself. That hungry 10-year-old boy who stared through a store window in 1928 became the man who made the Italian mob negotiate on his terms. 20 years. From invisible to indispensable. From powerless to powerful. The empire Bumpy built generated an estimated $50 million annually at its peak. He died with respect from enemies and loyalty from friends. He made sure his mother Margaret never went hungry again. He sent his sister Mabel to college. And he did it all by never forgetting what hunger felt like. Bumpy Johnson's story teaches us that circumstances don't define destiny. Strategy does. Discipline does. Refusing to accept powerlessness does. If you want more untold stories of Harlem's underworld legends and the real history that Hollywood won't show you, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment. What would you have done in Bumpy's situation at that 1948 meeting? Would you have fought, negotiated, or walked away? This is the real story, not Hollywood, the legend.